Hi, I'm Tom Morgan, Microsoft MVP and Community Reporter at Microsoft Ignite 2019. It's a huge honour to be joined today by Mary-Jo Foley, a renowned Microsoft journalist and commentator. Mary-Jo, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Let's talk a little bit about Microsoft Ignite then, because the pace of change, the way Microsoft is delivering, especially their cloud services now, it's so fast, right? We don't have these big 3-year releases. It's like a constant, almost like a rain of these new features. So for IT pros, something in the calendar like Ignite, is that still useful? Is that still a thing, it's worth attending?
Oh, I think so, for sure. In fact, almost more than ever, because the way Microsoft seems to be organizing their news these days is around these major events like Build and Ignite. And they save up a lot of announcements that they could be kind of dribbling out instead. And they make this the big forcing function kind of thing where, okay, here are all of our cloud announcements for the past, 3 months or 4 months. So I think it's definitely worth going to if you can make it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy as well for us if we're on it all the time, we're seeing all the announcements, then we know maybe what's been talked about. But if you're just trying to keep the lights on and the servers running, actually you might miss some of that stuff. So it's
That's
good to
true.
have something in the calendar. Has that changed over the years? Because you've covered all of the Ignites all the way back, into the past. Like, how's that changed over the years?
I feel like more and more Microsoft's rolling up their news into these kinds of events. Before, I felt like those events were kind of nice to have and a nice place to go network and meet people from Microsoft and the community. But now, because of the way they're trying to save up all their news for Build and Ignite, I feel like it's more pressing to go there in person.
Mm. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And what would your advice be for people going to Ignite, those IT pros and actually developers this year as well? It's new, and we can
I
talk
know.
about that. But for
Yeah.
those guys and girls going to Ignite, what should they be doing? How should they be getting the most out of Ignite? Is it just the sessions? Is it something else? Like, what's your tips?
So the sessions are very good to go to, especially if you have time to look through the 1,600 sessions that are listed on the site right now and kind of pick out some favorites and be ready to go to them if you can get in. But I always find these kinds of events are most important for networking. I feel like I always make a point of going out on the show floor and just walking around because inevitably you're going to meet somebody, whether there's somebody from Microsoft, an MVP, somebody in the community who you may know through email but not in person. And I feel like that's the main reason to still go to a show these days. I mean, you can watch virtual events, you can watch sessions after the fact on YouTube or wherever, but going there and meeting people in person is still the biggest plus to a
Yeah.
live event.
Yeah, definitely. And like we just mentioned about the developer focus at Ignite, there's a whole separate set of tracks. There's specific things for developers at Microsoft Ignite this year, and some might see that as a bit strange because we've got Build, which is the developer event, and we've had Ignite, which is the IT Pro event. What's your take on this?
I know. I was surprised too to see how much developer content there is at Ignite. It may be because Microsoft used to have this event called Connect around November every year where they announced a lot of developer news. It was usually in New York City. And they don't seem to be doing that anymore, or maybe they're doing it virtually. I'm not sure. So I don't know if they took Connect and kind of mushed it into Ignite or what happened there, but um, I think it's nice to have everything in one place, but it also kind of makes it a logistical challenge, right? Because now when I'm looking at the session list, I'm like, oh, I really want to go look at this UWP.net session, but at the same time, there's this Microsoft 365 one that I need to go to, and you can't be everywhere at once. So I think in some ways it's good to have everything at your fingertips, but in another way, it makes it much more challenging to do your schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's interesting as well. We're seeing a bit of not an overlap between Dev and IT Pro, but we're seeing definitely some kind of crossover there as well.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, maybe that's part of their thinking too, since they talk up DevOps so often. Maybe the thinking is let's bring the developers and the IT pros together and kind of force that, right?
Maybe it's either that or another DevOps conference, and maybe they didn't
Exactly.
want that.
Right.
So let's try and use your expertise and your kind of experience. What do you think the big topics at Ignite that we're going to see will be? Not to put you on the spot, and we promise not to come back and score you. But
So the good news is I'm not under NDA at all
Mhm.
about Ignite, so I can just give you my guesses, educated
Mhm.
and otherwise,
Mhm.
about what I think might happen. So what I do every year when this show comes out is I troll through the session list looking for clues, right?
Mhm.
And I do searches by topic and I do searches by code names and keywords. So one thing I did see that they're going to talk about more, and I'm excited about this, is the calendar.help.
Mm.
I guess it's a service that they
Mm.
created for scheduling meetings. And they're going to rename that scheduler, it looks like. And I think it's finally going to be coming out of preview and maybe becoming generally available. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of what Microsoft's doing around conversation as a service and AI, making intelligent agents available to people so that you can do things that look like very mundane tasks, like you and me trying to schedule a meeting without having to go back and forth over email incessantly to try to find a time that works, right?
Mhm.
So I think that we'll see more things around conversation as a service and the bot framework, um, more things around productivity in general, because that's basically the mission of Microsoft 365. I'm sure there'll be Teams news because um, Teams is their
Mhm.
kind of lead off product these days with Office 365. I don't know what specifically around Teams, but something. And I think, of course, we'll see a lot of Azure announcements. What I'm really interested to see them talk about, and I hope they do, is what's going on with Azure Stack, their hybrid computing
Mm.
platform. Um, I wrote something recently where I noted that they haven't really made a lot of updates to Azure Stack in the past year, and they haven't really talked about it a lot, which makes me think maybe they're about to rev it or reposition it in some way. And I feel like Ignite would be a great place to hear more about that.
Oh, interesting.
Also, this is like a crazy moonshot thought on my part, but given that there's quite a bit of Windows developer news, WinUI, WPF, PWA, all the acronyms around developer. I wonder if they're going to start talking about the developer story for those two new devices that they announced recently in New York, the
Oh,
Surface
that would be
Neo,
wild.
Surface Duo,
Yeah. Mm.
right? Because a lot of people think they're going to wait till build to talk about that. But if you think about it, they're talking about launching those in holiday 2020. Build
Mhm.
would be a little bit late to be talking about that, in my view, if you want developers to be on board with, customizing their applications so that they can work across dual screens. So that's
Mhm.
my
Mm.
crazy moonshot
Yeah,
prediction,
yeah.
but it would be really cool if they
It
did
would be
talk
cool.
about
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see. So, I mean, how's this event changed over the years? I mean, I know it being called Ignite is relatively new, but it's previous Tech Ed and before that. But it's obviously bigger than it used to be. But is it more corporate? Do you think there's more or less information they're sharing now compared to kind of previous years?
So one thing they do now that I really like is they're trying to hit all audiences, right? So they're trying to hit CIOs, CTOs, even CEOs, but also developers and IT pros. So in the past, I felt like they just kind of threw everything out there and didn't really try to distinguish who the audience was.
Mhm.
And if you were there, oh well, you could hear it. But now what they do is they do the first keynote with Satya and guests in the morning, and that's kind of the big vision keynote, right? But right after that, they do usually two or three technical keynotes where they really dig down into the product news. And so if you're there and you're somebody who cares about a certain track, it's much easier now to see where you should go and what track you should follow. I felt like before it was kind of catch as catch can, but now they actually have these learning paths and they try to guide you. Like if you're interested in Intune and mobile device management, go here. Here's the things you should look at. If you're more interested in Dynamics 365, which there are also quite a few sessions about at Ignite this year, here's your track over here. So I like how they're organizing it now. I feel like it's a little less chaotic, even though it's bigger, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It does. I think, yeah, without that, it would be crazy chaotic. 'Cause you're right. There's so many sessions. There's so much going on.
I know.
It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did a bit of research for this call, and I was kind of looking up your past, and I noticed that you did an interview with Bill Gates. Um, in 1984, but basically a year after you were out of college and a year after you'd started becoming a journalist. How on earth did that come about, and how did it feel?
I know. You know what? That would never happen anymore, right?
Right.
So in 1984, Microsoft was a much smaller company, and they were really hungry for press at the time. And so in those days, it was much easier to just make a request for executives' time and have them actually say okay. So when I decided I was going to write a cover story about Microsoft, I didn't know anything about them. I found their phone number in an annual report. I called the number and got in touch with the PR people who were handling Bill Gates, and I said, "Hi, I'm a journalist. I know nothing about technology. I'm going to write this cover story about Microsoft, and I need your help." And they said, "What are you doing next week? Do you want to come to Las Vegas and go to Comdex, and you can meet Bill and you can meet a bunch of the other executives?" And I'm like, "Okay." So I was so young, I didn't know to be scared. I mean, I was somewhat intimidated, but I was also like, well, you know what? This will be good. I'll learn right from the top, like what they're doing and what their strategy is and who they are. And meeting Gates at that time, he was not the same Bill Gates as now. He was much more brash. And he I don't know if you've ever heard these stories, but he told me I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was asking the stupidest question he ever heard. But you know what? It toughened me up and it made me a better reporter. And so I'm really happy that I got in on the ground floor, because right now, if you called Microsoft and said, "Hey, I want to interview Satya," you'd be like, "Yeah, you and like 5 million other people want to interview him," right?
Yeah, I tried. It's not
Yeah.
working.
I've only gotten him once since he's become CEO. But I used to interview him quite a bit before, when he was working on various product families at Microsoft, as he's been there quite a while.
Gosh, yeah. And so I guess you still go and see Satya talking with everyone else in the keynotes, and especially he's going to be talking at Ignite as well. What's that like for you? Because you must have heard so many execs over the years, and you've probably heard Satya speak so many times as well. Is it just normal, and like you just kind of listening out for the keywords, or like do you still get that kind of passion that lots of us get? Because we
Yeah.
only hear him speak once a year and all the rest of it.
I think, sadly, I feel like a lot of us journalists who cover Microsoft closely, we get very jaded, right? Like last year, I was like, "Oh no, I hope he doesn't say tech intensity again. He says it all the time, and I don't really understand what it is." But I still sometimes try to just sit back and listen for keywords, because that's one thing he does that's very interesting. If you really listen closely, he'll drop like a word or a phrase that you haven't heard before, and then you kind of follow up on it and say, "All right, there's a reason he thought that was important to say, and that's going to tell me something about where their strategy is going and what's next." So I've had good luck doing that with him. I just have to sit there and listen very closely and think, what have I not heard him say that he said today? And if you can do that and kind of look at it almost like a puzzle, it makes it kind of fresh and fun even after all these years.
Yes, that's really good. That's really interesting. Yeah. And so what are you going to be doing at Microsoft Ignite? What is it, all secret meetings, like at a press events? So what does Mary-Jo Foley do at Ignite?
Yeah,
Are
I
you staying the
exhaust.
whole week? Are you
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
going to be there from Sunday till Thursday this year,
mhm,
and I'm doing a couple speaking type things for various kind of private groups, but also I'm going to be networking, and I'm going to be out on the show floor talking to people. I try to go to sessions. Sometimes I'm successful getting there, sometimes not. They usually, for the press, give us meetings with different. Um, it depends on who you ask for, but different levels of engineers or managers on products or technologies that you've been following and you have questions about. So I have a lot of requests in for meetings. Hopefully I'll get some of those. And yeah, going to parties, trying to meet more people. But nothing like secret, really. More just kind of being on the press circuit and trying to keep up with all the different things that are being announced and that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, good. Well, we couldn't finish this off without talking a little bit about beer. So I'm a Windows Weekly fan, so I understand you quite like, you're a beer fan as well. And we're going to be in Orlando. So have you already done all the research for me? Where do I need to go? What should I be drinking?
So you know what? There used to be a World of Beer that was pretty close to the convention center, and they just closed.
Oh no.
I know. So that's where we've had a few meetups, because they have a really good beer selection. But what I usually do before I go to any city now, and I'm going to do this with Orlando, is do a search for new craft beer breweries around the Orlando area. And every year there are different ones and new ones. So I always try to at least fit one of those visits into my schedule. Florida has some good beer. If you see on any menus Cigar City beers, that's a brewery in northern Florida that makes excellent beers of all different styles, and I'm always happy to try anything they have. But yeah, I'm still kind of in the research phase myself this year about what's going to be new and cool to drink at Ignite. So stay tuned for a beer pick.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely worth catching up on, and I think I might try and do the same if I can get some time.
Nice.
But no, that's brilliant. Thanks ever so much for your time. It's been really, really interesting.
Great. Thanks for having me again, and I hope to meet you in person at Ignite.
Absolutely.